trapped by distress. Psalm 31, divine prayer for ultimate protection and inner peace. Break free. Have you ever been consumed by distress, paralyzed in a storm of fear, doubt, and anxiety, feeling utterly trapped with no clear way out? You try to move forward, but it's as if an invisible weight anchors you, keeping you stuck in a loop of despair. The echoes of your struggles grow louder in silence, and despite your cries for relief, peace seems like an unreachable dream. Psalm 31 is the answer to this relentless battle. It speaks directly to moments like these, when the pressures of life overwhelm and your soul cries out for rescue. Through its powerful verses, this timeless prayer holds the key to breaking every chain of emotional bondage, bringing clarity where there is confusion, relief where there is tension, and hope where there seems to be none. Through David's cries for refuge, we uncover that we're not alone. His desperation mirrors the very struggles we face today, the suffocating burden of worries, fears, and doubts. Yet, embedded in his anguish is a truth so liberating, so transformative, that it turns his desperation into unwavering confidence in divine protection. This truth is waiting for you today. Psalm 31 reminds us that God's presence is the ultimate safe place, fortress of peace that remains unshaken, even when life feels beyond our control. This is not just a spiritual idea. It's a promise of protection and clarity that meets us exactly where we are. In this video, you'll discover how this life-altering psalm forms a roadmap out of distress, guiding you back to a place of freedom, purpose, and lasting inner peace. Stay with me, because what you'll hear today won't just resonate, it's designed to transform. Together we'll uncover the deep emotional layers of Psalm 31, explore its heartfelt plea for protection, and discover practical spiritual principles to find clarity and resilience in your own life. It's not just about inspiration, it's about a breakthrough. Trust me when I say this. If you've felt trapped and forgotten, the weight of the world is drowning out your hope, this is your moment to reclaim strength, to break free, and to declare with boldness, "You are my refuge, O God." Psalm 31 is more than words, it's a lifeline. Right now, it may seem like there's no way out of your distress. But after today, you'll see a clear path forward, a path grounded in divine protection and unshakable peace. Emotional opening story relating to real-life struggles. Imagine Sarah, sitting alone in a dimly lit room, her hands resting on a table strewn with unopened bills. The weight of her situation presses down tightly, making her chest feel heavy and her breathing shallow. For months, she's been running on empty. Every night, her thoughts spiral into panic, questioning how she make it through another day. The stress consumes her like a storm she can't escape. She's exhausted but unable to rest, haunted by a relentless cycle of fear, failure, and emotional suffocation. Sarah is not a stranger to resilience. She's faced tough times before, managed to push through challenges, and held on to hope, but this season feels different. It feels endless. It feels like she's sinking deeper in quicksand, fighting harder and faster to find solid ground, only to sink further. To the outside world, she appears strong, smiling through her pain and navigating the routine obligations of life. But internally, she feels like she cannot take another step. Every attempt to find relief through distractions, advice from friends, or coping mechanisms leaves her feeling emptier. Distress has become her constant companion. Then one evening, surrounded by silence and darkness, Sarah reaches for a dusty Bible tucked away at the back of her bookshelf. It was her grandmother's, handed down before she passed, but Sarah hadn't opened it since the funeral. She doesn't know what she's looking for, but the urge to search for something beyond herself propels her. Her fingers fumble as she flips through the pages, and her eyes land on Psalm 31. Something about the opening words catches her attention, and she pauses. "In you, Lord, I take refuge." She reads the words aloud, her voice trembling, but she's drawn further, rereading and pressing in. "Turn your ear to me, come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me." Tears well up in her eyes as she realizes this prayer feels like her own. David's desperation mirrors hers, his cry for rescue echoing the words she couldn't form herself. For the first time in months, Sarah feels seen, as though this ancient psalm was written specifically for her, for this moment of brokenness she thought no one could understand. She continues reading, and the raw honesty in David's words moves her. "My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me." Sarah whispers those words, barely able to speak as tears stream down her face. It suddenly dawns on her that the enemy isn't just the circumstances she faces, the fear, anxiety, and sense of inadequacy that have taken root in her mind. Psalm 31 begins to feel like more than poetry. It feels like an instruction, a guide to letting go of what she was never meant to carry alone. David's plea isn't just a cry, it's an act of surrender, an open declaration of trust in God's power to deliver. As she closes the Bible, Sarah falls to her knees and begins to pray, not with a polished or perfect prayer, but with simple, honest words of surrender. "God, I can't do this alone anymore. I need you. Be my refuge. Save me from this storm I can't calm on my own." That night, for the first time in what feels like an eternity, Sarah sleeps. The bills on the table haven't vanished, the uncertainties still loom, but something within her has shifted. The oppressive weight she carried now feels lighter. Her circumstance hasn't changed, but her heart has. She experiences the stillness of knowing she doesn't have to fight this alone. Sarah's story is more than one person's victory. It's a reflection of what countless people experience in their darkest moments. The overwhelming storms of distress come in different forms, but the cry for refuge is universal. Whether it's financial hardship, emotional burnout, or deep loneliness, the human soul longs for the safety and peace found in surrender. Sarah's moment with Psalm 31 wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. It was a turning point, a reminder that no matter how hopeless she felt, God's refuge was waiting for her. Psalm 31 not only declares protection, but invites us to release our control and embrace the strength of the one who hears our cries. The beauty of Sarah's story comes from its universality. It reminds us that the Psalms aren't relics of the past, but living truths that speak to the struggles of today. Her prayer may have felt like a whisper in the void, but it reached the ears of a God who listens, who sustains, and who rescues. Sarah learned that God's refuge doesn't always erase the storm, but it protects us within it, shielding our hearts and renewing our strength so we can rise again. If you've ever felt trapped, alone, or consumed by a battle you can't seem to win, Sarah's journey and David's prayer from Psalm 31 can become your path as well. In those raw, unfiltered cries to God, something incredible takes place. Burdens are lifted, clarity is restored, and peace begins to settle where fear used to reign. Your way out of distress is not beyond reach. Your refuge is near, closer than you think, and it begins just as it did for Sir, with a simple but powerful surrender in you. Lord, I take refuge. Quick overview of Psalm 31, key themes and relevance. Psalm 31 opens like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. It begins with a declaration of trust, a desperate plea for God's refuge, and a cry for divine rescue. This is what sets it apart, the raw humanity intertwined with unshakable faith. In just the first few verses, David paints a picture of a soul that's been battered by the storms of life, but holds firmly to the hope of safety found in God. It is more than a prayer. It's a blueprint for navigating the chaos that so often consumes us. At its core, Psalm 31 communicates three essential themes that remain as relevant today as they did when David first penned them. The first is refuge. David repeatedly calls God his rock and fortress, images of strength and stability amidst life's uncertainty. Refuge, in this context, is more than shelter. It signifies a complete state of trust, of resting in God's provision, no matter how intense the storm may become. This invitation to refuge is what so many miss in our modern culture of hyper-independence. Today, we often see surrender as weakness, yet David's words reveal it to be one of the greatest sources of power. The second theme is deliverance, not just from external threats, as David mentions his enemies, but also from the internal battles that weigh heavily on the heart. Anxiety, doubt, fear, hopelessness. We all face these enemies within, and Psalm 31 provides a language for battling them. Deliverance here isn't instantaneous though. It's a process, a journey where trust has to take root. For modern listeners, this is especially profound. In a world seeking immediate solutions to stress through distractions like endless scrolling, superficial entertainment, or fleeting vices, the psalm teaches patience and perseverance in waiting for true deliverance through faith. The third theme is redemption. Near the middle of the psalm, David boldly proclaims, "You are my God. My times are in your hands." These simple phrases convey ultimate surrender, the act of handing over control of not just a situation, but an entire life into God's hands. Redemption doesn't always mean an immediate escape from struggle. It's God weaving purpose into our pain, turning distress into something meaningful and life-giving. And how powerful is that concept for audiences today? In a society that often views pain as a barrier, this psalm reframes suffering as a bridge and opportunity to grow closer to divine truth and personal resilience. But what makes Psalm 31 timeless isn't just its themes, but how deeply it resonates with real human emotions. David doesn't hide his struggles. He speaks of his tears, of being scorned, even of loneliness and fear. There's no mask, no pretense, no attempt to appear as anything more than human. To the person reading Psalm 31 today, this is liberating. In a world dominated by polished perfection on social media, where admitting struggle is often seen as a weakness, David sets an example of raw honesty. It's a reminder that God doesn't need us to come to Him with our lives already figured out. God meets us in the brokenness, in the questions, and in the cracks we try to hide. And how does this timeless truth connect to our modern lives? Think about the pressures of today: constant connectivity, endless demands, and a world that seems to never rest. Stress has become the default state for many people. The rise in burnout, anxiety, and emotional isolation shows how desperately people are searching for peace. Psalm 31 enters this space as a breath of fresh air, offering not just hope, but practical wisdom for navigating these challenges. It's a reminder to pause, to seek shelter not in fleeting fixes, but in eternal truths. It invites us to stop looking for strength within ourselves and shift our eyes upward to the one who never fails. Even on a neurological level, the act of trusting something larger than ourselves has been shown to alleviate anxiety and bring balance to our emotions. Science tells us that gratitude can improve serotonin levels, and mindfulness can lower stress hormones. Psalm 31 is, in a way, an ancient expression of these modern psychological insights. Through its verses, it teaches us not only gratitude but also presence and intentional awareness of placing our lives in God's capable hands. But it's not just about the individual reader. Psalm 31 speaks to collective human experiences. It's for every person who's running on empty, every parent juggling stress, every student burdened by uncertainty, every worker overwhelmed with demands. It's a reminder that no storm lasts forever, and that even when it feels like the walls of life are closing in, there is one who stands as a refuge, unwavering and immovable. In the end, Psalm 31 isn't merely a prayer to recite. It's a living, breathing source of resilience and calm in a chaotic world. It's an invitation to shift our focus from how overwhelming the waves seem to the one who walks on them. David's words carry a timeless truth that no matter how heavy our burdens may feel, refuge, deliverance, and redemption are always within reach to those who are willing to surrender. And that truth is both profound and deeply needed in today's world. The mystery of emotional distress, understanding its root causes. Distress has a way of creeping into every corner of our lives, often without warning. It whispers doubts when we try to rest and shouts fear when we try to move forward. But what makes distress so overpowering is not just the situations we face externally. It's the battle that wages within. To break free, we need to understand why it grips us so tightly and identify where it takes root. Without this awareness, we remain trapped in cycles of burnout, anxiety, and disconnection. Psalm 31 offers us a profound framework to confront our distress head-on, not by masking the symptoms, but by addressing the core of what's truly weighing us down. When David wrote Psalm 31, he wasn't simply asking for deliverance from visible enemies. His words reflect something far deeper, the internal enemies that claw at our peace and resilience. These are the same forces we wrestle with today. Modern life may look overwhelmingly fast-paced and complex, but the struggles remain timeless: fear of failure, worry over our futures, the pain of rejection, and the nagging sense that we are not enough. As David cried out, "Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress," he gave voice to something we all feel but often struggle to articulate. Distress, at its core, is the tension between what we carry and the strength we have to carry it. Understanding distress begins with acknowledging our limits. Today, we live in a world that demands endless availability, constant achievement, and unrelenting self. We are told we should have everything together, balancing success, relationships, and personal growth as effortlessly as flipping a switch. Yet beneath this glossy surface lies exhaustion. Distress grows when we believe we must do it all alone, when instead of releasing our burdens, we continue to carry them until their weight crushes us. This relentless cycle feeds one of the most damaging roots of emotional distress: control. Our human instinct is to hold on tightly, convinced that if we let go for even a moment, everything might fall apart. But Psalm 31 challenges this perspective. David's cry to God, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," is not an act of giving up. It is an act of profound strength, the courage to release what he could no longer control into the hands of the one who can. For us today, this is a radical shift. It's not about abandoning responsibility, but about recognizing the limits of our control and placing trust in a divine refuge that never falters. Emotionally, distress often thrives in isolation. When we're overwhelmed, we tend to retreat inward, convinced that no one else could truly understand the level of our pain. This isolation feeds the lie that we are alone in our struggles. But Psalm 31 calls out this lie with undeniable clarity. David's raw honesty in his distress, his willingness to cry out to God, is a reminder that we were never meant to carry life's heaviest burdens by ourselves. For those struggling under the crushing weight of silence, this realization can become a turning point. Distress also operates on a physiological level. When faced with overwhelming challenges, our brains activate a survival response heightened. Cortisol and adrenaline levels flood our systems, pushing us either to fight or flee. While this biological response is necessary in life-threatening moments, many of us live in a constant state of heightened stress, unable to shut it off. Over time, this wears down our emotional balance, making distress feel like a never-ending trap. Modern psychology emphasizes practices like mindfulness and gratitude to counteract this cycle, unlocking calming neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Psalm 31, in its poetic richness, offers not only a spiritual response, but an emotional and even physical way to step out of distress. Prayer, the act of surrendering fears to God, has been shown to ease mental tension, reduce stress hormones, and create a sense of calm that goes beyond surface-level relief. What makes this psalm more than a practical response to distress is how it reframes the struggle entirely. We often want instant resolution, the problem solved, the pain gone, the road ahead clear. But Psalm 31 doesn't promise immediate deliverance. It points us to a divine process, one that strengthens us as we wait. Verse 24 closes with a call to courage. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. This isn't passive waiting. It's an active stance of faith, a resilience forged not in the absence of hardship, but in the presence of divine shelter. Another profound root of distress is misplaced identity. Many of the burdens we carry come from measuring our worth through the lens of worldly achievements, approval from others, or external circumstances. When these measures fall short, as they inevitably do, distress fills the gap, whispering lies about failure and inadequacy. Psalm 31 uproots this entirely by anchoring us in something permanent, God's truth. David declares, "You are my God. My times are in your hands." These words remind us that our identity is not tied to what we accomplish or how others perceive us. It is rooted in the eternal, unchanging nature of God's love and purpose for us. This shift from striving to trusting, from control to surrender, doesn't erase the challenges we face. The storms of life will still come. But when we allow ourselves to operate from a place of divine refuge, rather than relying solely on our strength, we find freedom. Freedom from the endless battle for approval, from the need to manage every detail, and from the fear of not being enough. The mystery of distress lies in its power to reshape us. What it asks of us is a choice. Will we allow it to harden us, trapping us in fear and frustration? Or will we allow it to drive us closer to the refuge of divine grace? Psalm 31 holds an unshakable promise. The embrace of God's fortress is always open. And when we surrender the heavy weight of our struggles into His hands, we discover a strength that isn't ours alone. It's here, at this intersection of release and trust, that real peace begins. The cry for rescue. Meditating on David's plea, in the opening lines of Psalm 31, David's cry cuts straight to the heart of every person who has ever faced overwhelming pressure. In you, Lord, I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. This is not the voice of someone simply reciting religious words. It is raw, desperate, and deeply human. It is the cry of a soul that has reached its breaking point, stripped of all illusions of self-sufficiency and crying out for the only rescue that truly lasts, the kind that comes from God. David's plea is profound, not just because of its depth, but because of its direction. He doesn't scatter his fears into the void or bury his anxiety beneath distractions. He directs his cry to someone he believes isn't just listening, but ready to act. He calls God his rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. It's worth pausing to consider the power behind this imagery. Rock and fortress evoke stability, unchanging resilience amidst chaos. David, a man of war, used these words intentionally. He knew what physical fortresses offered in battle protection, strength, and safety. But in this moment, he's speaking of his soul. He's choosing to anchor his inner world not in his own ability, but in God, his ultimate refuge. This decision to turn to God instead of remaining paralyzed by fear reveals something crucial about distress. Its power begins to weaken the moment we redirect our focus. Fear thrives on isolation, making us feel as if we are alone in our struggles. Shame convinces us that reaching out for help is a sign of weakness. Yet David's words defy this lie by showing us the strength found in vulnerability. His cry is an acknowledgement of dependence, a reminder that true power doesn't come from pretending we have it all figured out, but from surrendering to the one who does. But David doesn't stop at naming God as his refuge. His next words carry a startling level of trust. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me. Instead of demanding immediate resolution to his problems, he acknowledges God's sovereignty, asking for guidance instead. This is significant. Often, when we cry out in distress, we aren't simply asking for relief, but for control. We want to dictate how God should solve our problems or when he should act. But David's plea is different. He places his life fully in God's hands, trusting not only in his power to deliver, but also in his wisdom to lead. And what about when deliverance doesn't come right away? David speaks directly to this tension. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. Here we see the unfiltered weight of his emotions. He doesn't sugarcoat his suffering or try to minimize it. He fully acknowledges the depth of his pain. This is where many of us falter. We often see sadness, grief, or frustration as emotions to avoid or suppress. But David's example shows us something profound. True faith doesn't deny the reality of pain. It simply refuses to let pain have the final word. This acknowledgement of sorrow is one of the most relatable aspects of the psalm. While David's cry is rooted in his unique circumstances, likely facing betrayal or danger, we all have our own version of distress. For some, it's the weight of financial struggles or strained relationships. For others, it's the daily grind of feeling unseen or unappreciated. And for many, it's an unnamed anxiety, an underlying sense that things are falling apart, even if they look fine on the surface. What unites all these experiences is the universal human longing for rescue. Psalm 31 doesn't shy away from this, meets us right in the middle of it. When David declares, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," he offers more than just a statement of trust. He gives us a roadmap to peace. The act of committing something into God's hands is an act of release. It's letting go of the burdens we can't control and trusting that God's hands are stronger and safer than our own. Today, this is a challenge many struggle with. The illusion of self-reliance is deeply ingrained in modern life, where we're conditioned to believe everything depends on us. Letting go feels counterintuitive, even risky. Yet David's prayer reminds us that surrendering to God isn't giving up, it's finding freedom. It's important to ask, though, what does rescue look like? Does it mean all of life's problems vanish? Does it mean the storm immediately quiets? Not always. Sometimes God's rescue doesn't come by removing us from the storm, but by anchoring us within it. He becomes the fortress that holds steady even as the waves crash. David's own life is a testament to this. His battles didn't disappear overnight. His enemies often surrounded him. Yet what changed was his perspective. He could face the storm because his soul was no longer fighting alone. Modern psychology often emphasizes the power of reframing a mental shift that allows us to see situations differently, reducing stress and anxiety. Psalm 31 mirrors this beautifully. David reframes his distress by grounding his identity in God, declaring, "You are my God. My times are in your hands." This statement is transformational. It stops us from being defined by our struggles and instead anchors us in the unchanging nature of God's faithfulness. David's plea invites us to do the same. When distress overwhelms, when the storm feels unrelenting, we can cry out just as he did, not with polished words or perfect faith, but with honest, desperate dependence. The act of meditating on these verses is, in itself, transformative. It reminds us that we are never alone in our battles, and that the God who answered David's cry is the same God who stands ready to rescue us today. Divine protection in the face of inner enemies. As David cries out in Psalm 31, "Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me, free me from the trap that is set for me," we begin to see that the enemies he speaks of aren't always external. Yes, David may have been pursued by physical foes, but this moment reveals something much deeper. The traps he mentions can also be the invisible snares of fear, doubt, and self-sabotage. These are the battles that many of us fight daily, the ones no one else can see. Inner enemies are subtle, yet profoundly destructive. They creep in quietly, whispering lies that sink deep into our thoughts. "You're not strong enough. You'll never make it through this. You're completely alone." Left unchecked, these voices grow louder, creating doubt, discouragement, and a paralyzing sense of defeat. For many people, these mental traps become the most significant obstacles they face, casting longer shadows than any external struggle ever could. They entangle the heart and mind, leaving us stuck in cycles we can't seem to break. David recognized the danger of these unseen traps. That's why, before asking for deliverance, he began with a declaration of God as his rock and fortress. He sets the foundation for rescue by anchoring himself in God's character. Let that sink in. Before David even asks for freedom, he first reminds himself of who God is. This step is crucial because inner enemies often thrive on forgetting God's promises, his power, and his constant presence. When we lose sight of these truths, the lies in our mind start to feel like absolute reality. One powerful aspect of Psalm 31 lies in its imagery. "Free me from the trap that is set for me," David prays. The word trap conjures the image of something deliberate, something designed to ensnare or immobilize. Traps aren't obvious, they're hidden, meant to be unnoticed until it's too late. Isn't that exactly how fear and doubt operate? They begin as small whispers, seemingly insignificant, but before long, they control how we think and act. Fear convinces us to stay in unhealthy situations, doubt holds us back from opportunities, and self-sabotage prevents us from believing we're worthy of healing. David's prayer invites us to call out these traps for what they are. They may feel inescapable, but they were never meant to define us. His raw words of surrender can serve as our own asking God, not only to free us, but also to guide us out. Notice the balance between these two requests. Lead and guide me. Free me. It's a reminder that deliverance isn't just about escaping the trap. It's also about learning to walk forward in God's direction. Freedom from inner enemies requires not just release, but redirection. Psalm 31 also gives us a glimpse into David's internal struggle in verses like, "Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief." Here, David openly acknowledges the toll his internal battles have taken on him spiritually, emotionally, and even physically. This is where divine protection becomes more than a theological idea. It becomes tangible. David's anguish reminds us that the weight of inner enemies is real, and their effects are felt throughout our entire being. But here's the key. While David doesn't deny his sorrow, he does deny its permanence. He chooses to entrust even his deepest distress to God. Modern life amplifies these inner battles. We live in a culture of relentless comparison and constant noise. Social media tells us we're not enough. Society pressures us to achieve at all costs. And in the quiet moments when we're finally alone with our thoughts, the battles rage louder than ever. That's why the truth of Psalm 31 is so vital today. David's cry reminds us that inner enemies don't have the final say. Through faith, we can recognize them, confront them, and find refuge in God's unwavering protection. Science even supports the profound impact of this spiritual surrender. When we bring our fears and anxieties to God, the brain's stress response begins to regulate. Studies have shown that prayer and meditation can decrease overactive cortisol levels, promoting calm and mental clarity. More importantly, surrendering to God through prayer activates neural pathways tied to hope, gratitude, and emotional resilience. In essence, David wasn't just nourishing his spirit, he was transforming his mind, aligning it with the peace only God can provide. One of the most practical lessons here is the recognition that divine protection doesn't always mean the removal of struggles. Sometimes, God's protection comes through His presence, reminding us that while the storm hasn't ceased, we will not be destroyed by it. Protection is the assurance that no inner enemy, not fear, doubt, or despair, can sever the connection between us and our Creator. David's words also reveal an active trust in God's leadership. To pray, lead, and guide me is to admit that on our own, we don't always know the right way forward. Surrendering to divine protection is not a passive escape. It's a declaration that we're willing to be led, willing to let go of our pride and allow God to take control. This act of surrender is transformative. It's what turns feelings of helplessness into acts of faith. It's what allows us to face our inner enemies with the confidence that we are not battling them alone. Psalm 31 teaches us this truth. Divine protection isn't about avoiding the struggles of life. It's about being equipped to face them with clarity, courage, and peace. It's about walking through the hardest seasons, knowing that the traps set against you will not prevail because God is your fortress. To embrace this protection, we must follow David's example, naming the struggles, entrusting them to God, and walking forward under His guidance. The inner enemies will come, just as they came for David. But they are no match for the one who stands before us, beside us, and behind us as our rock and refuge. When distress rises, we can hold firm to this truth. God's protection will never fail, and His hand will always be there to guide us out of every trap, no matter how strong it feels. Faith in the midst of waiting, overcoming mental turmoil. Waiting can feel like torture. When life feels unsteady and we're desperate for answers, the passage of time not only challenges our patience, but unsettles our very foundation. In Psalm 31, David offers a window into this experience. His world is collapsing. He faces enemies, inner grief, and relentless external pressure. Yet what makes this passage so striking is the tension between his human frustration and his resilient trust in God. This tension, familiar to all of us, is what defines the act of waiting. It isn't idle, and it isn't easy. It's a deliberate act of faith, a decision to hold on when the answers we crave seem far out of reach. David expresses this tension in verse 9. "Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief." His honesty is stark and raw. He does not sugarcoat his feelings, nor does he attempt to rush through them. His soul is weary, his strength diminished. Yet, amidst the weight of sorrow, something remarkable unfolds. David balances this lament with declarations of trust and hope. "But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God." The choice of the word trust here is significant. Trust, in the midst of uncertainty, is not a feeling, it's a discipline. Faith in waiting often means accepting a contradiction, acknowledging our pain without being consumed by it. David's words teach us that distress and faith can coexist. Too often, people believe that doubt or frustration cancels out faith, but this psalm reveals the opposite. True faith does not ignore hardship, transforms it. Faith allows us to remain anchored to God, even when life's circumstances feel utterly chaotic. The mental turmoil of waiting comes primarily from the human desire for control. When problems arise, we instinctively look for solutions. We want resolution, progress, and clarity, ideally on our terms and within our timeline. But waiting on God requires a complete surrender of that control, and that can feel excruciating. It's this tension, the pull between surrender and self-reliance, that makes waiting a crucible for faith. To let go of control feels impossible because it strips away our illusion of power. Yet, when we release that grip and place our times in God's hands, as David proclaims in Psalm 31-15, we unlock the ability to rest in his divine timetable. Waiting often magnifies the noise in our minds. Questions swirl endlessly. When will God act? What if my situation doesn't improve? What if I've been forgotten? This mental turbulence feeds anxiety, reinforcing the belief that nothing will change. Yet Psalm 31 reframes this struggle by calling us to focus not on timelines or outcomes, but on God's presence. David declares, "Love the Lord, all his faithful people. The Lord preserves those who are true to him." This focus shifts the narrative. Instead of obsessing over the when or how, we are invited to focus on the who, the character and faithfulness of God. Faith in waiting isn't passive resignation, it's active perseverance. It means continuing to pray when answers don't come. It means choosing gratitude for blessings, even amidst uncertainty. It means holding fast to the promises of Scripture, which remind us that God is always working, even when we cannot see it. For many, this is the most challenging aspect of faith, not seeing immediate results, yet continuing to believe that God's plans are unfolding in the unseen. Consider verse 24. "Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord." This verse is David's encouragement not only to himself, but to everyone who finds themselves trapped in the paralyzing stillness of waiting. Strength and courage are not rooted in the absence of fear. They are born in the decision to keep trusting despite fear. Waiting refines our faith because it teaches us to rely not on our emotions or circumstances, but on the unchanging character of God. Modern life has conditioned us against waiting. We live in an age of instant gratification, where solutions are a click away and patience often feels obsolete. But the spiritual discipline of waiting stands in stark contrast to this world of immediacy. Waiting reminds us that God's timing is not bound by human conventions. In fact, The very act of waiting often accomplishes a work greater than the resolution we seek. It matures our faith. It teaches us humility. And it reveals, over time, God's perfect wisdom in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Research into the human mind offers another layer of insight. Studies have shown that practicing hope and patience during periods of uncertainty can rewire neural pathways, creating greater emotional resilience. Acts of trust like prayer or meditation physically calm the brain and restore balance to the nervous system. In spiritual terms, this reflects the transformative experience of waiting on God. As the psalm puts it, God's presence doesn't simply sustain us, strengthens us in ways we can't fully comprehend. Waiting also forces us to reevaluate where we place our hope. Often, distress surfaces when we've allowed external circumstances, or even our desired outcomes, to become our foundation. When those things waver, we panic or despair. But Psalm 31 invites us to ground our hope not in outcomes, but in God's character. David's repeated declarations of "You are my God" throughout the psalm remind us that faith isn't about knowing every detail of the plan. It's about trusting the one who holds the plan. David's experience challenges us to redefine waiting as an opportunity rather than a burden. Waiting invites us to lean deeper into prayer, to allow God to shape our hearts, and to trust that His deliverance is always perfect both in timing and design. While human impatience clamors for quick resolutions, divine waiting produces something greater, a faith that doesn't depend on circumstances, a peace rooted in God's unchanging nature, and a hope that no storm can shake. Psalm 31 reveals that waiting is not a punishment. It is a process of transformation. It's during the waiting that we grow. It's during the waiting that we learn to rely on God's strength instead of our own. And it's during the waiting that we discover a depth of peace and trust that could only be found in the stillness. If you find yourself in a season of uncertainty, feeling the weight of silence, let this truth anchor your heart. God is not absent in the waiting. He is preparing, refining, and strengthening you. Like David, you can cry out in honesty, acknowledge your weariness, and still proclaim, "My times are in your hands." Faith in waiting is not a passive act, it is a bold declaration that even in the unknown, you trust the one who knows all. The turning point, trusting the hands of God. There is a moment in every story of struggle where the tide begins to shift. It's not always the moment when the problem is resolved or the weight is completely lifted, but rather when a deeper trust takes root, a trust capable of transforming how we endure the storm. In Psalm 31, this turning point is clearest in David's declaration, "But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands." With these words, David doesn't just acknowledge God's presence, he actively surrenders to it, placing his life, the entirety of his being, into hands greater than his own. Trusting the hands of God begins by understanding what those hands represent. Throughout Scripture, God's hands are described as powerful, creative, protective, and sustaining. They formed the heavens, crafted humanity, and stretched out to heal. They are eternal and unshakable, offering a shelter stronger than any fortress we could build ourselves. David understood this, which is why he chooses to entrust his entire existence, his times, meaning his seasons, his future, his every moment to God. This is the ultimate act of surrender, not trying to control the storms, but choosing to trust the one who commands them. But what makes trusting God's hands so transformative? The answer lies in contrast, because so often our natural instinct is to rely on our own hands instead. We grasp for control, for solutions, for anything that might give us a sense of stability. Yet, inevitably, our grip falters. We try to hold on to our plans, but they slip through our fingers. We try to fix our problems, but they become too complex. Human hands, no matter how capable, have limits. They grow tired, they make mistakes, and they cannot carry the weight of life's greatest burdens. David recognizes this truth, and instead of clinging tighter to his own abilities, he lets go entirely. He places his life in God's hands, where no burden is too heavy and no detail goes unnoticed. This moment of trust is not abstract. It's deeply personal and practical. When David says, "My times are in your hands," he's acknowledging that his life doesn't belong to chaos, to his enemies, or even to himself. It belongs to God. Think about that for a moment, the peace that comes from knowing that you are held by an almighty, sovereign creator. It doesn't mean the struggle disappears, but it does mean the struggle no longer holds ultimate power over you. When you trust God's hands, you begin to see your burdens in the light of His strength, not your own limitations. There's another layer to this trust worth exploring: the courage it takes to release control. Trust isn't passive, it's an active choice. Saying, "I trust you, God," isn't always easy, especially when the circumstances around you seem to contradict that trust. It requires stepping into the unknown, acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and resting in the belief that God's vision is infinitely clearer than your own. For David, this surrender came at a time when his enemies were closing in and his emotions felt raw. He wasn't waiting for reassurance. He trusted in the middle of the uncertainty. That level of faith moves mountains, not just the mountains outside us, but the ones within us. Modern life constantly tempts us to rely on ourselves instead of God. We are taught that independence is strength, that we should push harder, work longer, and figure things out on our own terms. Yet, over time, this self-reliance leaves us exhausted and spiritually malnourished. Trusting in God's hands defies this cultural narrative. It frees us from the constant pressure to perform and opens the door to divine rest. Psalm 31 reminds us that trust is not about inaction. It's about releasing what we cannot control while continuing to walk forward in faith. Psychologically, this surrender has profound effects. When we let go of the need to micromanage every aspect of our lives, we create space for peace to enter. The brain begins to release its constant vigilance, and stress levels decrease. Spiritually, the act of trust allows us to align with God's purpose instead of wrestling against it. Trust becomes the bridge between fear and freedom, between anguish and renewal. David's choice to trust doesn't mean he ignores the threats around him. His enemies are still present. His circumstances haven't magically improved, but his perspective has shifted. By acknowledging God's control, he reclaims his peace. This is a critical lesson for us today. Trust doesn't always change the external situation immediately, but it always changes us internally. It realigns our hearts with God's will and equips us to face whatever comes next, not with dread, but with confidence. The phrase "into your hands" echoes throughout the Bible, most notably spoken by Jesus on the cross. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." In both cases, this act of commitment represents the ultimate release of control. For Jesus, it was the surrender of his physical life for the redemption of humanity. For David, it was the surrender of his fears, his plans, and his enemies into the care of a faithful God. Both moments teach us the same truth. Surrender isn't a loss, it's a breakthrough. It's the place where our feeble hands let go and God's almighty hands take over. To trust in the hands of God is to embrace a peace that withstands the storms of life. It's choosing to believe that, even when the path ahead isn't visible, the one leading you is trustworthy. It's allowing the promises of Scripture to override the doubts in your mind. You are my God. My times are in your hands. These words aren't just a declaration, they're a weapon against every fear, every uncertainty, and every lie the world tells us about the chaos of life. They remind us that no matter how fragile we feel, we are held by the one who never fails. So, if you find yourself clinging to control, worn down by the weight of life's uncertainties, consider this. Trusting in God's hands doesn't mean giving up hope. It means anchoring your hope in the one place where it cannot be shaken. Like David, we can say, "You are my God," knowing that his hands are steady, strong, and unfailingly good. Pathway to peace. Simple, spiritual practices. True and lasting peace doesn't just appear, it is cultivated, nurtured through deliberate acts of faith and spiritual discipline. Psalm 31 lays out a foundation for this journey, offering more than just words of comfort. Within its verses are tools, spiritual practices that help us shift our hearts and minds from chaos to clarity, from fear to assurance, and from self-reliance to trust in God. David's plea raw and honesties, more than a cry for rescue. It is a blueprint for anchoring ourselves in God's presence, even when life feels unsteady. Peace begins with surrender, and surrender begins with prayer. One of the simplest yet most transformative spiritual practices anyone can engage in is honest, unfiltered communication with God. David demonstrates this repeatedly throughout Psalm 31, from the heartfelt cry, "Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me," to the words of quiet trust, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." Prayer isn't about crafting the perfect words. It's about bringing your truest self before God. It's not about presenting a sanitized version of your struggles, but laying bare your fears, doubts, and pain. In doing this, we release the weight we've been carrying and place it at the feet of the one who can bear it all. But prayer isn't just about speaking, it's also about listening. Often, in our desperation for answers or relief, we rush through our conversations with God, pouring out our needs and then moving on, too distracted to hear his response. Developing a practice of stillness is essential. In Psalm 31, David writes, "Love the Lord, all his faithful people." Those words point us to the quiet affection of being present with God, of pausing long enough to feel the weight of his love and to hear the whispers of his guidance. Set aside time daily, even for just a few minutes, to sit in silence before God. This small act can recalibrate your heart, reminding you that peace isn't found in striving but in abiding. Another essential practice is gratitude. While Psalm 31 reflects David's distress, it also highlights his unwavering acknowledgement of God's faithfulness. The Lord preserves those who are true to him. Gratitude disrupts the cycle of worry. When your mind starts to spiral into what-ifs or worst-case scenarios, pausing to reflect on God's past goodness changes the narrative. Keeping a gratitude journal is a simple yet powerful act. At the end of each day, write down 3 ways you saw God's presence, big or small. Maybe it's the warmth of sunlight after a storm, the unexpected encouragement of a friend, or simply the strength to make it through a hard day. Recognizing these blessings builds faith for tomorrow and a deep sense of peace rooted in God's ongoing provision. Meditation on Scripture is another invaluable practice that leads to peace. Psalm 31 itself is a profound passage to meditate on. Choose one verse, like, "My times are in your hands," and reflect on it deeply. Repeat the words slowly, allowing them to settle into your heart with each breath. Imagine releasing your worries into God's hands as you meditate on His sovereignty. This isn't just a spiritual exercise, it's a rewiring of your mind. Neuroscience supports the transformative power of meditation, showing how intentional focus on positive truths can help neutralize anxiety and create new pathways of peace in the brain. Meditation bridges the gap between faith and mental wellness, grounding us both spiritually and emotionally. One of the most practical ways to live in peace is found in slowing down. God's peace isn't found in the frantic pace that many of us operate at daily. Life may demand speed, but peace demands rhythm. Take time to breathe deeply, to walk without rushing, and to intentionally disconnect from the constant noise of the world. David speaks of God as his fortress, a place of refuge and safety. The fortress isn't frantic. It's steady, rooted, immovable. Adopting God's rhythm through intentional rest reminds us that peace isn't a destination, it's a posture. Forgiveness is another powerful spiritual practice that unlocks peace. Often, the inner turbulence we feel is amplified by unresolved bitterness or anger. David, in his cry for deliverance from enemies, doesn't seek revenge but rescue. He entrusts judgment to God, releasing the burden of taking justice into his own hands. Forgiveness doesn't excuse wrongs, but it frees us from the corrosive effects of resentment. Praying a simple prayer, "Lord, I release this person into your hands," is not easy, but it's transformative. Finally, trust is the foundation beneath all these practices. Every prayer, every moment of silence, every act of gratitude or forgiveness ultimately points back to the same truth. Peace flows from trusting God. Peace isn't the absence of conflict or challenges. It's the confidence that, even in the midst of hardship, you are held by a God who will never let you go. Trust doesn't grow overnight, but with each small decision to lean on God, it deepens. Begin each morning by declaring, as David did, "You are my God." Let those words settle into your spirit, not as a fleeting statement, but as an anchor for your day. The path to peace isn't complicated, but it does require commitment. Each of these practices, prayer, stillness, gratitude, meditation, forgiveness, and trust, builds on the others, shaping a life rooted in God's presence. The beauty of Psalm 31 is that it shows us peace isn't just for the perfect, the strong, or the already faithful. It's for the weary, the overwhelmed, and the broken. It's for anyone willing to cry out, "Be my refuge," and trust that God does, indeed, answer. If peace feels far off, start small. Begin with one prayer. Take one moment of stillness. Commit one worry into His hands. These seemingly small acts form the foundation of a life transformed by God's peace, a peace that transcends understanding and meets us exactly where we are. Living in the refuge of God, Psalm 31 is more than a prayer. It's an invitation to live from a place of profound trust and safety in God's refuge. As David closes the psalm with these words, "Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord," it's clear that his journey through distress, fear, and uncertainty has led him to a deeper understanding of God's faithfulness. This conclusion is not a shallow declaration of encouragement. It's a tangible reminder that choosing to hope and trust in the Lord transforms how we live even in the face of adversity. Living in the refuge of God requires us to carry the principles of this psalm into every aspect of our lives. To view God as a fortress means not just running to Him in moments of crisis, but building our lives within His steady and unshakable presence. A fortress isn't temporary, it's a permanent place of safety and strength. This is how David chooses to live, and he invites us to do the same. It begins with a decision to let God be the foundation of your life, not just a shelter you go to when the storms come. Central to living in God's refuge is the continual act of surrender. Surrendering to God is not a one-time event. It's a daily, even moment-by-moment choice. It's waking up each day and saying, "Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit." It's recognizing that nothing lies outside of His control, even when life feels chaotic. Surrender doesn't mean life will become easy or that we'll never face distress again. David himself experienced trial after trial, but it does mean that the weight of those challenges no longer rests on our shoulders alone. The moment we truly surrender, we begin to step into the peace that God has promised us. Another key to living in God's refuge is learning to trust His timing. One of the hardest aspects of faith is waiting for answers, for change, for deliverance. But as Psalm 31 shows us, waiting isn't wasted time. David reminds us that my times are in your hands, a profound declaration of surrender to God's perfect plan and timing. When we live in God's refuge, we no longer need to force outcomes or demand immediate solutions. We can trust that His timing is not only wiser but ultimately better than our own. Learning to rest in this truth frees us from the cycle of anxiety and allows us to experience His peace even in the waiting. Living fully in God's refuge also means reshaping our identities. David's repeated acknowledgement, "You are my God," reminds us of a crucial truth. Our worth, security, and purpose are not defined by our circumstances, our failures, or even our victories. They are defined by God. When life presses us to measure ourselves by worldly standards, achievements, possessions, or the approval of others, Psalm 31 calls us back to the refuge of God's unchanging love. In Him, we don't have to strive to prove our worth. Our value is already secure. The challenge, of course, is that the storms of life are relentless. Fear doesn't disappear overnight, and doubts don't simply vanish. This is why living in God's refuge requires discipline and intentionality. It's about keeping Psalm 31 at the forefront of our hearts and minds, calling on God in prayer, meditating on His faithfulness, and reminding ourselves of His strength in moments when life feels overwhelming. The more we practice these habits, the more natural it becomes to live from a place of trust rather than fear. One of the most powerful aspects of the refuge God offers is that it's not limited to our personal struggles. When we experience His peace, His protection, and His love, we're called to extend that same refuge to others. David's concluding encouragement, "Be strong and take heart," suggests that his journey through despair and trust wasn't meant for him alone. It's a call to pass that hope on to others who may feel lost, burdened, or afraid. Living in the refuge of God transforms how we show up, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. It allows us to become beacons of grace and compassion, pointing others toward the same shelter we have found in His presence. Ultimately, Psalm 31 reminds us that refuge in God is not just a temporary escape from life's hardships, sets a new way of living. It's a return to the simplicity of trust, the freedom of surrender, and the unshakable peace that comes from knowing we are held by hands far stronger than our own. David's words echo across time to meet us where we are, reassuring us that God's faithfulness endures no matter what storms we face. Living in the refuge of God doesn't mean life will always be smooth. The winds will still blow, and the waves may still rise. But the difference is this: when we are rooted in Him, the storm no longer has the power to break us. Our foundation is secure because it rests not on our own strength, but on the unchanging character of God. So, let David's closing encouragement take root in your heart today. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. strength, and courage aren't about never feeling afraid. They're about choosing to hope, even when fear whispers otherwise. To live in God's refuge is to trust that His promises are not just for the future, they are for this moment, right now. The safety, strength, and peace of His fortress are yours to dwell in forever. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. No matter how heavy the burden or how fierce the storm, God remains your refuge, your fortress, and your unshakable foundation. Make the choice today to live in the fullness of that truth, because there you will find the peace you've been searching for all along. This concludes the content for the series. Let me know if there are any adjustments or if I can assist further.